go. I wasn't sure what you were saying. Well, thank you so much for coming here. It's so exciting to see this many people. The way the panel is going to go, we will introduce ourselves, and then we will go into discussion. And the last 15 minutes will be dedicated to questions and answers. And for questions, you can either raise your hands, or you can go to slido.com/South by Southwest, and we will be happy to answer whatever questions you have. So my name is Lenina. I'm a multimedia artist. I create robotics that do all sorts of funny things. They dance, they fart, they expose themselves, and I tell stories with these works. These stories are extensions of my own story, and so I turn myself into the creatures that I create. I make robotics look like me at times, and I perform with my work. I also make paintings and animations. I paint myself into the animations, and I perform with these works. And my work is about difficult subjects at times. It's about sexual violence, death, loss, addictions. And I find that it's impossible to talk about these works, or these subjects rather, without injecting humor into them. And now, Carla.
Oh, okay. Yours. And do I get this little clicker?
Yes.
And I just press like that?
Yes. No. Yep. Perfect.
Oh, cool. Okay. Hi, everybody. How many people are from Austin? Oh, yay! Okay, so I hear Austin has more bats than any place in North America. Is this true? Yeah. Okay, so what happens when you mix a computer with a vampire bat? Love at first bite. Yeah. So I don't want y'all to expect much from me today because I wasn't a really good student. I was like a C++ student. Yeah. I'm going to sit down now. All right. So, my work. This past year was a year of my getting to take over a lot of things. So the first slide you're looking at is Lady Ava Interface. And Lady Ava was an embodied AI assistant that took over the Whitney Museum's website every morning at sunrise and sunset. Next is the evolution of me turning into one of my other alter egos, Lucille Trackball. And as you can tell in this metamorphosis, I'm also very inspired by art history. So this is Archimbaldo mixed with the famous comedian Lucille Ball. And Lucille Ball is an AI stand-up comedian. This is her in AR space. And Lucille likes to say, I've got a lot of algorithm, but no soul. Also, I got to take over Instagram of a gallery in New York this year. And here you see a lot of my friends, including C.A.R.L.A. That's Carla, my avatar, cross-platform avatar for recursive life action. And finally, oh, how do I go back? Yeah, there I am. Last slide. And then my final takeover was Times Square. So all these kind of crazy characters where I'm really interested in kind of what identity is today mixed with virtual and physical life. And so here I have my merry band of misfits taking over the advertising screens of Times Square. And of course, they're taking selfies.
Hi, my name is Sven Otel. I don't consider myself an artist per se, because what I do generally, I try to serve stories that get provided to me by other people. So I try to weave digital content and media into the storytelling, usually in the context of live theatrical performances. But, apparently you have to click, the big green button. But not necessarily theater. The rules of storytelling and theater apply in just about any live environment. So this is a production of Candide where God is played by a live puppet master, and he's commenting live on what's going on downstage, which is the well, closest to the audience area for those of you who are not theater people. And this is a production of The Confederacy of Dunces at the Huntington Theater, and I'm basically providing scenic backgrounds that have a certain tone or tonality, rhythm, feeling. So, because everything that I do always has to connect with the overall world that the production considered to be the right choice for the storytelling. This is a gazpacho to go commercial, which I produced for Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, the musical, which is one of many short-lived Broadway productions I worked on. We put a lot of thought and design into these productions, and then we put it out to an audience which essentially play tests these concepts for us, right? And then, if they don't like what they see, we've run out of options to change anything because the show opened and it closes. So this is what happened here. And this is Midsummer Night's Dream, not inherently funny, but it does have the Rude Max in it, and it was quite beautiful, which leads me to Kirk Lynn.
Hey, howdy guys, I'm Kirk. I'm a playwright with a company called The Rude Max. I'm also a novelist and a screenwriter these days. What's that? Oh, there we go. I think being a writer for me means mostly I spend most of my time alone in a room, really sort of wrestling with self-doubt and narcissism. So it's nice to be in a room with a bunch of people where we can all wrestle with it together. I'm from Texas, which means I think it's influenced me to make a lot of my work sort of trying to capture the wild and the disappearing from the world, not just in nature, but I think also in human experience. I think a lot when I'm writing about what are the experiences that I've had that my kids and their grandkids won't understand when they're 46 like me. I also teach, and one of the things I try and teach is try and teach students how to be entirely unreasonable. I think most of the works that we consider great, Dostoevsky, Emily Dickinson, Cardi B, these are people who are entirely unreasonable in some manner of their work. And so the last thing I ever want to do is tame students, but instead try and encourage them to be even wilder and more unreasonable than they might be. One of the most recent sort of moments of being unreasonable that's happened in my life is a couple years ago, my theater, which had been around for, well, we've been around for almost 25 years as a collective, which is entirely unreasonable. But we had a theater for about 17 years and we just lost it. And it asked us to think, instead of sort of letting it ruin us or make us bitter, we decided to let it challenge us to start thinking about how we could make theater without theater or actors or lights or set or anything. And one of the pieces we made these weird little cardboard polyhedrons that connect with magnets. And we tried to think about making a piece that followed geologic time rather than human time scales. And so over the course of an evening, we build a giant mountainscape, and we have thrust faults and plate tectonics, and then we destroy it all. And then maybe one of the reasons I'm here, another thing that I've been doing is creating plays that sort of travel, plays and performances that travel without anything else. This is a play called The Replacement Tapes that's on tour right now because essentially all you do is order a tape recorder that arrives at your house with headphones, and it tells you to press play, and it gives you all the instructions you need to make a play if you just follow the instructions. And now we're working on an app that's sort of cheekily called Cyrano that does the same thing. It sort of whispers in your ear how to perform. And in that spirit, my pals up here asked me to make a little performance for you guys. So we're going to start with a little performance I'm going to offer you. Most of you probably know there used to be a practice where if you wanted a certain kind of effect in your life or effect in your artwork, that you would pray to the muse of that effect. And so I've composed a little prayer that we're all going to pray together to Thalia, the muse of comedy. So if you want to pray with me, all you have to do is repeat after me. Dear humor, I know you're out there. I command you. Answer your mating call. Ha ha. Ha ha ha. For wherever two or more gather and laugh, everyone else wonders, what the fuck is so funny? This is how jokes travel. By repetition. Like an echo that can save us. When we're trapped at the bottom of a quarterly sales meeting. or at a panel at a convention.
At a panel.
There is a kind of disaster that only humans can make. When we know what time it will happen, and how long it will last, and even who will be there. The only thing we don't know is if it will be funny. Please let it be funny. Amen.
So who is Thalia and why should we pray to her? Essentially, what is humor and how do we use humor to tell stories?
Yeah, I thought it was fun to think about praying to the muse in the sense that I think humor is a great disruptor. I think humor is a way of sort of meaning something and not meaning something. I think it's a way of breaching social norms. It's a great tool, I think, for both technology and for storytelling to sort of bind people together. Usually if you can make people laugh, you can feel sort of closer to them or bound to them in some way. And then I love the notion of just intention, of like if you want something, just calling for it. I want Thalia to be here with me. I want humor to be here with me.
Yeah. And that release is so important. And it's really interesting because we've been meeting, this is my first time meeting everyone. I'm from New York. But we talked yesterday and we started recounting different things about our own cultural identity. And half of my family is originally from the Appalachian Mountains. And oh my God, I grew up with some amazing storytellers. So Grandma Pansy May, Grandpa Talbert Smith Tester, they could tell some doozies. My grandpa wrestled more bears. But also a lot of it, there was a lot of poverty, a lot of darkness, and a lot of their ballads were dark, but there was this one that was just so important to me as a child. And it was about alcoholism and adultery. And I'm going to sing a little bit, and then I'm going to sing my redo of it. So, and please, no one take offense because this is from the 20th century. So there's one thing, because it's National Women's Day, International Women's Day, so there's one little wifey thing. Don't take offense, I don't. But early 20th century. So here we go. Last night as I come home, drunk as I could be, whose head laying on the pillow where my head ought to be? Come here, little wifey, explain this thing to me. Whose head laying on the pillow where my head ought to be? You old fool, you blind fool, can't you very well see? That's just a baby my mama give to me. 10,000 miles to travel, 10,000 miles to mourn. First time I ever saw a baby with a beard on its face of 4. Okay, so give me one more second. Yeah, I know I can't sing. But so I decided to redo it. So this is a millennial Brooklynite and their partner. Last night when I come home, drunk as, their partner is a teacher. Last night when I come home, drunk as I could be, whose head laying on the pillow where my head ought to be? Come here, equal partner, explain this thing to me. Whose head laying on the pillow where my head ought to be? You old fool, you blind fool, can't you very well see? That's just a robot my students give to me. 10,000 miles to travel, 10,000 miles to mourn. First time I ever saw a robot with a man bun on its head of 4. Okay. I'm done.
I have many thoughts. We probably don't have the time to unpack here. It also reminded me that I actually consciously make the decision to stand behind the scenes in my work as opposed to being in front. But I do care deeply about storytelling, and I do care deeply about telling stories in a way that engages audiences. So I can talk about engagement a lot. And I think humor is one of those things that can really help to engage with an audience. And we can look at it as almost like a tool, certainly from a designer's perspective. We talked of various examples. So in my work, I project a lot of imagery which is blatantly make-believe. There is a a contract we make with the viewer, the audience, that what you are seeing is actually a very cohesive world which has its own rules, and it's all going to make sense. So, but when I project, say, a window that is, you know, maybe a 10 polygon window, which is obviously not a real window, and I make an actor throw something at the window, nobody expects anything to happen. But if the window breaks and somebody throws something out of that projected window, then you generally get the audience to laugh and really accept that this is a reality that is cohesive and makes total sense. And a lot of times that's what I'm trying to do with the work that I'm creating. And it's one of the tools to use humor to basically de-alienate those kind of projected, relatively sterile technological environments. Because that can look very austere often.
It's funny to think about the assertion, the idea that like we make the contract that this is fake. I think a lot of times when we tell stories, when we tell jokes, when we project things, I mean, when I see an image, I think that it's real and it's trustworthy. It's funny to try and think about. I think a lot of times when we get in trouble for humor, we've crossed that line of a compound. Is this real or are we playing? Because it's easy when you're telling jokes, when you're approaching something trying to be funny, that you don't necessarily have a solid contract about whether this is real or this is fake. It's a hard. I mean, when you started your song, you said, "Agree not to get offended by this." That's a hard thing to ask of people. Of like, before you hear anything, before you look at this image, remember this isn't real. I think for the most part, what's real or not real to us is not necessarily real or not real to the hearer or the viewer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, similar to the ancestors of yours, I feel like for me, humor is really an aid to deal with difficult things. One character that appears a lot in my work is death, and it's a scary concept, but I turn it into a funny character. Its mouth is sewn shut, it cannot eat its prey, so it's always hungry. And so instead of feeling fear, I invite everyone, well, let's just laugh at it. Let's laugh at our fear of death. So it just, brings that other dimension to it.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm playing with in my work too. Working with these, Lucille Trackball, for instance. Lucille Trackball is my alter ego right now, so I'm performing Lucille Trackball. So I'm a human trying to play an AI who's trying to play human, and we're both trying to be funny, and neither of us really are. But also, Lucille Trackball is a way for me to talk about certain issues. Lucille Trackball, for instance, is over 40, and her operating system is Cougar. And so, and I'm able to, tackle some issues that sometimes just as Carla Gannis, I don't feel comfortable with. And so finding this comedic voice has been really therapeutic in a way.
Well, it's a way to start a conversation about taboos, right?
Yeah, taboos.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Right.
others, certain things we feel like we don't want to laugh about or laugh about.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from Germany originally, as you may hear, and we are naturally not known to be the funny people. We actually looked for a long time for a German joke or joke about Germans we can all laugh about. But I've worked on many productions where I have to deal with very serious subjects, particularly with regards to World War II. Either the Nazis generally. I lived in the UK for 10 years, and I had to work on a lot of shows about British soldiers who committed an incredible brave act to retreat their people. And I've projected poppies on landmarks in Marble Arch and places like that. And I was in lots of situations where I had to empathize with the main story and create a solution that would communicate the essence of that story really well. And oftentimes humor is crucial to that, because if it's too serious, then oftentimes we lose interest after a while. Not immediately, but after a while. So I try to add a little whimsy often to it.
But the one thing I think in terms of taboos, and particularly now because we're really recognizing identity in this cross-sectional way, right? And all of these factors go into it. And so and I'm an academic too. I teach at Pratt Institute, and I think context is really important, and I think it's who is telling the story. And I think sometimes it's really important that that voice is coming from someone where, you know, it's something they have ownership of it, right?
And yeah, I would say I think humor is always dangerous. I think one of the things, you know, if you try and really wrestle with this definition of what is funny, why are things funny, I think one of the elements that is, at least in some percentage in the recipe, is that it breaks social taboos, that it breaks past social norms. And so there's always, humor wants to be dangerous in certain ways, and once you start sort of letting it out of the bottle, I think it's hard to contain it. I think comedians have an impossible job to sort of, they're supposed to break social taboos, and then they break one too far, and they're like, oh, you know, how do you can't step back in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I mentioned the thing, I think I mentioned the thing about teaching because a lot of comedians aren't playing colleges anymore, and so I didn't kind of finish that thought, you know? And I think that there was a time before smartphone culture where people could kind of test things out. It was more an iterative approach, and they could test something out at a club, and if it bombed or if it went over the line, they just didn't use it again. But now it gets tweeted out, and then there's a Twitter storm about it. And so, you know, how is that affecting humor and comedy? And, you know, I still think context is important. I think in, you know, certain situations, co-opting someone else's story, and I think it's also power, superiority, what, you know, kind of the framework is.
I was going to say, as much as I think humor binds us, if I can tell a joke and we all laugh, we can feel together, we probably are less able to categorize how many people don't laugh and the people who feel cast out. But I think a lot like, I think prayers work this way too. There's a kind of rhetoric that draws a line, and these people are the inside of the joke, or get the joke, and these people are on the outside. And I think humor is used both ways. I think we like to think of it as something that brings us together, but it's also something that casts people out. If you don't get this, you don't belong in this group.
When you talked about the comedian, it made me think about other ways where technology is actually helpful to test out humor. So I teach at UT Austin here in town, and we're working on an escape room project, which we want to play test. So we can do that using a game engine and check out whether a particular moment is funny, engaging, or not. And just as a as a flip side to the technology being an impediment to actually testing out impediment to humor, it actually can enable humor in a lot of ways if you're just willing to embrace new ways of working out how to tell stories.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, being worried about, you know, hurting people's feelings. I work with, one of the subjects is human sexuality. I offend people at some point. I had a situation where I was showing in a gallery on the ground floor, and the father came in. He was upset that there was this doll that was flashing its plastic breast that was going to traumatize his preteen son. Somehow it was completely beyond me, but, you know, you were saying that there are certain people that are only allowed to tell certain stories. I feel that in my family, I lost a lot of family during the war. I want anybody to tell their stories. I don't want just those kind of, you know, the people that live through things. Some people don't have that chance. So everybody should be able to contribute.
Yeah, no, I think advocacy is really important. I think, again, it's the role you're playing. And I think contributing to these stories and being advocates for people. But there are a couple different types of humor. So one, which is about a 2,000-year-old concept, is that humor is about superiority. And when humor is coming from a superior place, and you're making jokes about the Holocaust, I did not lose family, but I don't think that it's really appropriate. So.
But at the same time, humor is the best agent to start talking about things.
But is it about appropriateness, though? I mean, because we talked earlier about it's about airing social taboos and starting a discourse. So, and oftentimes when you start a discourse, it's because you disagree. Which means one person will think, this is totally inappropriate, this is uncalled for, you shouldn't say this.
Yeah, and who is the arbiter? I mean, that's the thing, and it gets really gnarly nowadays, right? And who really gets to decide. And it really does kind of, especially now because we're very polarized, and one thing that's happened with the internet is the thing that was supposed to kind of universally connect us, our Tower of Babel, so to speak, we've actually become, you know, more tribal, like we're these groups, and we all kind of have our bubbles and different ideas that we perpetuate. And that can be problematic, I'll agree.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, I was in a situation a few years back where I was asked to design imagery for a production of Party People, which was dealing with the movement, the Black Panther movement and the Young Lords movement in the middle of the 20th century, you know, and I was sort of the sole white dude on the creative team, and I was sort of a little uncomfortable in that situation, because I feel, well, how am I entitled to tell this story? And, you know, they were great, and they said, well, we really appreciate that perspective from the outside. And that's why they asked me to do it, because they just felt I can articulate those things visually, and they were actually interested in me being the other.
Yeah, and there was empathy and advocacy. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some jokes, obviously, that lost in translation. Two of my galleries that I'm working with are German. When I try to tell them the jokes that I see in the war movies in Russia, they don't find them funny.
You can probably see me frown often now, but that's just my natural kind of...
You can tell. Well, actually, you know, one of the probably the most favorite ways for Russians to spend time, even if you completely disagree with each other, you tell each other jokes, and then you laugh together. Sometimes, you know, the joke's kind of not the funny, but, you know, everybody enjoys themselves. Yeah. You have another, you know, a few drinks, that helps too.
My dad's a barber, so I grew up in a barber shop, which is a place of incredible humor. And it was a place where I think the way I learned from my father this kind of affection that comes out through teasing, that if you're a Republican, my dad's a Democrat. If you're a Democrat, he's a Republican. He's always like goading everybody who's in the shop. And so it's an interesting space where there are these sort of temporary communities made. But one of the questions going through my mind is, I'm starting to doubt, even in this moment now, if humor is actually good for us. There's a way in which I think humor gives us little micro releases so that we don't have to be pissed off about our religious differences or our political differences, or but that the anger that could build up, that could make change. I wonder if humor is also just a great tool of essentially venting off passion and steam so that we don't riot.
Well, Gandhi said he would have committed suicide if he didn't have a sense of humor. I think humor is pretty important. I think, you know, that levity is necessary.
We need to build another, like, use Second Life and build a world with no humor and test it out. We need to beta test it.
Beta test. Yeah.
I feel I'm doing that quite frequently, actually. There are so many experiences which I look at, which is also somehow how this panel came about, because we look at a lot of new technologies and different types of storytelling experience, and I think Yulia, you should speak about it, because this was started the reason for having this panel.
Yeah.
The reason for starting this panel was that we saw a lot of digital technology that seemed devoid of humor to us, which I may not be the best judge, but you started it, right?
Well, I mean, I felt that there's some with humor we can self-reflect too.
Yeah.
And also take ourselves maybe more lightly, and sometimes it's lacking. But I wanted to also talk about human presence and the importance of human presence in the works that we do, and why is it that, why can't human presence maybe cannot be substituted for digital? Or can it be?
I mean, it's a great question. When we were just sort of grab asking, I mean, there's so many ways that you know, digital technology, Tinder, Grindr, it brings us together. There's lots of human connection that's made through technology. I wonder about the sort of synthetic human connection made through social media, things like that, and how long-lasting that is. But it's, I mean, so much of when I first started out as a writer, I was really lonely. I was sitting in my room all the time, and I had a conscious thought that, oh, if I had a theater company, I would have friends. If I made plays, I'd have friends, because plays need people. And now, 25 years later, when I have you know, a theater company that's committed to each other for life, that we've been together for 25 years, and I've got kids too, and a wife, the thing I crave for now is no human connection. I want to be alone, I want to be quiet, and this craving for silence. Also in my technology, I don't want technology to speak to me or ask me any questions. So I wonder about the balance between how much human connection we want and how much human connection we want to stay away from.
Yeah, but you know, I still relate to it, because I started as a studio artist, and now I perform, and I have a crew, I don't have a company, but I really needed that communication with people and the connection. And I also feel that when I perform, when I'm on the stage, when I'm in the moment, there's this presence that happens. You know, there's like connection to what it means to be human in some way that is so meaningful, and I feel like it cannot really be substituted for me.
Does it have to be face-to-face always, though? Is it always about face-to-face for you in terms of that kind of human connection? I mean, the reason, like Kaho Abe, she's doing these games, and I really love these games that she makes where to play the game, she's making these wearable gloves, and you're playing Ms. Mary Mac, this children's game, but to death metal. I mean, it's fantastic. And like to play, you have to coordinate face to face. But then I've had some really meaningful experiences. And 2 years ago, I did a performance where I said hello in 50 minutes to my 5,000 plus Facebook friends, you know, waving. And, you know, and I was trying to kind of test this, you know, situation, this scenario where I have 5,000 friends virtually, but in physical space, I can only maintain about 15 close, you know, relationships.
Well, I feel like, you know, but how important are those relationships? I mean, in some way, there was this situation when I was on the stage, and I had a moment when there was a fire projected onto me, and there was a girl in the front row, and she got so concerned. It was a little girl. Oh. She wanted to run and save me, and I feel like if she would watch the YouTube documentation of it, she wouldn't care at all. And so these moments, I don't think they can be translated into digital.
Well, I thought about other situations where I look at virtual worlds where I feel a real connection with, and that's usually when there is another person in there. And and when I say another person, it doesn't even need to be a real person. It just needs to be somebody who behaves like a real person.
Oh, it can be a bot. You're okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be okay with that if it abides by the rules of that world and doesn't kind of throw me out. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because I mean, for example. I've been to an escape room recently, and I could see the ceiling of the warehouse, and it was supposed to be underwater. And that would be an example of the rule being broken, because I know I'm not underwater because I can see the ceiling. So those are the kind of rules I'm talking about when we create a cohesive world.
I think a lot about, you know, I spend so much time in text and think of text as this amazing, you know, the written word is this technology we created it so that we could have telepathy and we could have time travel, that Emily Dickinson can think a thought, change it into language, and send it across time so that it goes inside my head, some version of it, is a really stunning, magical ability. But I also spend so much of my life trying to get into the present moment, and I wonder how dangerous it is to spend time. So I'm not just talking about, oh my God, my kids played Minecraft too much, but even living inside novels, how much I'm escaping the sort of here and now and going to other places, other times, and how, whether that's valuable or not, I'm suspicious. I think that moment when we laugh, we feel a connection to the here and now. But I think there's a lot of uses in which we are escaping the here and now.
I want to ask something about, you mentioned earlier though, like with your technology today, and if we think of her and other movies that are, you know, kind of presenting a world just a few minutes in the future, you don't want really to hear it or know it's around in a way, so it becomes invisible to you, or it doesn't bother you,
what,
or
technology?
It doesn't, yeah, your technology. Or did I just, yeah.
No, I don't think so. I love technology. I mean, I sort of want, I was thinking like when you look at the world, everybody's got their phone all the time, even right now. And that my kids probably won't understand that because the technology will change, it'll be implanted, they won't understand. So to capture somehow what this was like, what this time period was like when we made these little things, like that seems beautiful to me. I'm excited to share what life was like in that way. So it's not like anti-technology, but just wondering also, I don't want to be a Luddite. I want to think even about books, about what are the things that bring me into this moment with you. Your example of the little girl trying to save you is a moment where she was in the real moment, even if technology was leading her to think you might be on fire. Whereas watching it on YouTube, nobody would call 911 because we understand the rules. Maybe I want more things in my life where people call 911 for me.
Yeah, there's an interesting piece that these artists did in Chat Roulette, and it was, he hung himself, and then and he did not actually do this, but it looked like he was hanging, and then they recorded all the people watching him, but only one person wanted to call for help, but they didn't know how to locate him. Yeah. So, and that was really, really poignant. And I think that that's something that we do need to be aware of. Something that I'm really interested in is computational humor. And, you know, how it might not be that our machines or these other intelligences are actually becoming conscious or more empathetic, but ways that we can program them so that those interactions feel more meaningful. Like when you were talking about that it can be a bot as long as it abides by the rules in that particular environment.
Well, that was in the context of human presence. So if that bot can simulate human presence, I'd be interested in that.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I just wanted to say the artists, just to give them a shout out, it was Eva and Franco Mattis who did that piece in Chat Roulette.
I can also think of examples where an actual performer has saved you know, my work from actually looking out of place or ridiculous. You know, there's many examples where something just doesn't work. Like people walk through walls that have, there's doors in a wall and there is a brick wall projected onto it. You would not expect an actor to come through that wall, but they do, more often than not. And they come out of shrubbery and all sorts of places that's projected onto walls. But if that actor then basically wipes some dust off his shoulders, or has some leaves on their face, or is wet, or you know, something that connects it to that projected imagery, then that the rules of that projected world remain, and it can often be funny. I had this actor on stage with a car that was just a frame, and he was moving the car around with his feet, and the imagery was supposed to correspond to the movement of the car, or his point of view, and it went the opposite way. Oh, no. And he commented on, oh, I must have gone the wrong way. And, you know, and the audience laughed out loud, and those things are useful, those kind of moments for storytellers.
I think one of the rules of humor is that jokes break something and fix something at the exact same moment, and we relish that paradox. So the broken window, the window that is just a video projection, but you throw something and it breaks. That's a way in which it both works and it doesn't work by our expectations at the same time. One of my favorite jokes is a Frenchman walks into a bar with a duck on his head, and the bartender says, "Where'd you get that thing?" And the duck says, "Oh, I got it in France. I got millions of them." And so it heals its logic and breaks its logic at the same time.
Yeah, so maybe can you think of times when, you know, similar to this, humor brought you together closer to the community?
I can think of one.
Yeah.
And it starts as a net art project. It was Lorna Mills, this artist, Canadian-based artist, wanted to make a remake of John Berger's film 1972. It's John Berger's Ways of Seeing from 1972, and it's a documentary. And it's a pretty remarkable film where he's recontextualizing kind of art history, or the way art history has been told, the stories. But she asked over 114 artists from around the world to take a minute from that film and to reproduce it. And most of us know each other online. So there's an example of feeling connected. There's this human presence, all these humans making a minute each of this film. But what was really exciting is then the piece, when it was finished, it was 4 different segments, and they were all humorous, because it's all of these artists making GIFs. There were lots of different funny jokes, you know, kind of a post-internet version of Rembrandt, for example, these kind of things. And a lot of this is more visual humor and visual puns, but it also got into the Whitney. So it was in this Whitney Museum show, and so then all the artists are invited, and for all the people who could come, we're all there together, and we're just laughing and having fun, and our gifts are in this Whitney show, and it was just an amazing experience. Yeah.
Trying to relate this to my work, because a lot of times I get asked to create a very specific emotion, including humor, make something funny, and because I work in collaboration with other people, and the expectations of producers is very specific, that the user has or the visitor has this particular experience. So I just get notes like, not funny, or you know, doesn't work, can't tell you why, you're the expert, right? And you know, and then I have to fix it. And you know, and so I'm not experimental in that, so I, you know, grab into my tool belt and figure out how to make it more funny and then try it out. And hopefully it's the right kind of funny. And it's quite surgical in comparison to what you are describing, because I basically pick an approach, and then this is going to make it just right, kind of funny. And
I think a lot of comedians are really surgical, and then they pull it off once they're on stage.
Yeah.
And that notion with comedians test things out, and how long can you test things out before they get captured and made permanent? I think it's such a fascinating idea. I had a time when I was working with some new artists working on a play, and one of them happened to comment that we're not that comfortable with each other because we don't fart around each other. And then suddenly it became this contest for everybody to fart as much as they can, which made us laugh, and it certainly made us feel closer to each other. It was awful. Everybody likes fart jokes, but nobody likes actual farts.
Oh, I have a robot.
Well, you have to come to my family for dinner. Oh, yeah. I have 7-year-old twin girls. That's their favorite thing to do.
It's always funny.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I have this robot I've had since 2005, Robo Sapien. And my favorite thing about Robo Sapien is that he farts. But his aren't smelly. So that's why, I can condone it.
Yeah, well, should we open it up?
Sure, let's wrestle some questions.
Questions?
Slido.
Yeah, Slido. I guess slido.com, hashtag South by Southwest, or just raise your hands or come up.
Anyone have questions?
Here's some questions. Oh, okay. Any occasion where you've never used humor?
I'll answer quickly. I don't know that there are. I think it's just so ingrained in me how I work and how I think. And I think humor, because it violates taboos, because it is dangerous, I think it leads me to conclusions I wouldn't get otherwise. That doesn't mean there aren't times when I don't have to apologize or try and repair relationships, but I can't think of an occasion I wouldn't use humor.
I can't either, but it's usually not my decision. So if somebody else decides it's distracting, when somebody laughs about the imagery or something in the imagery, because we should be looking at the performer, which seems very ironic in the context of this discussion. But
there are not many times I can think of, and actually something came to me this morning. Several years ago, my mother was going into surgery, and it was really quite serious, where she might not survive. And my cousin and I, we both love to draw, and we drew all over the area that was going to get operated on, crazy pictures, and then we said hello to her surgeon, Dr. Shattuck, I remember his name. And I remember afterwards, I was like, if she's not okay, how am I going to feel about it? But also, when she got into the operating room, the surgeon said, we can't operate yet. Has anybody taken a picture of this art? And so, yeah, I mean, and that was an important release for all of us that day, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, humorous life is very dark, and I think that when everything fails, you have to laugh at it, or with it, really.
With it, yeah.
Yeah. So the next question, what role does improvisation play in your work? So I guess for me, I just really let things kind of naturally evolve. I don't try to control things when I work. I just trust the process. I probably am completely uncomfortable with improvisation on stage, so when I perform, everything has to be rehearsed 100 times, otherwise I feel like I'm gonna have a heart attack. But in the studio, it's a completely different situation.
Yeah, I mean, in my work, everything is iterative, everything gets tested. A lot of times in front of an audience, if something doesn't work, something has to change next time we do it. So, but I generally always try to have whimsy in a lot of my work, because I want to take the seriousness away, and I don't want technology generally to look like it's competing with the human presence, and that's one way to do that, to almost add a human facet to the projected imagery, in a sense that it feels more organic. It feels like it has almost a sense of humor, that something goes wrong essentially in the imagery, and that is intentional.
I think as a writer, there's a sense that I have outlines and plans, but when things seem to be working the best is this notion, if I understand correctly, the word inspiration comes from a root which talks about breath, and that you're sort of being whispered to by your characters or the muse, that not only do you have a plan, but you're also tapped into some greater, stranger power. One of my favorite stories of a writer is that Rilke said that he wrote the Duino elegies in something like 2 days or 6 days or something like that, and he felt like an angel was, he didn't mean it metaphorically, was literally whispering to him what the poem was. And I would love to meet that angel someday.
Yeah, that flow. I think it's also referred to as flow. And I was going to answer this question with, yes, I improvise all the time. I come up here and I have my notes with me. But it's actually something, when I get in the flow, you know, I really do feel like that I'm kind of divinely inspired. And I think that that really is important, particularly with generative work or working with our algorithms, you know, that you want to kind of keep something that's alive or something that suggests that a human was involved in this process.
Yeah, so the next question, can you define whimsy? What makes something whimsical?
I mean, I can give an example. So if I project, going back to that wall, that seems very handy. If I'm projecting a wall and there's a bunch of actors in front of it, performers in front of it, but that's very serious and it's a wall and everybody thinks, oh, this thing's never going to move. But, you know, I've tried to make a wall, and there's a little flower at the bottom, trying to make a dog walk past that wall and basically pee on that tiny, tiny, tiny flower, which is the only piece of nature in the entire image. And the flower dies and the dog walks away, and it's very kind of sort of non-eventful looking, but it brings the whole thing alive, and it's going to make a few people smile. And that's what I mean. And I learned that in my 10 years living in the UK, how that works.
I was going to tease you that German whimsy seems really fucking dark.
Yeah,
like dogs,
yeah,
dogs pissing on things and killing them.
Yeah, I don't know whether there's a German definition of that.
Of whimsy. I mean, I think of whims as like that notion of doing something, you know, in the moment, in this moment of inspiration. So whimsy seems to have a kind of looseness and a freedom to it. Yeah.
There's another question. Can we
go
on to that? Because I love this. Why do some movies, shows, books stay funny over time and others feel dated? So like even preparing for this today, I was thinking about that Lucille Ball episode where she's doing the Vita Vita Vitamin commercial, if anyone remembers this or if anyone's ever seen it. But in it, she progressively gets drunker and drunker. It's supposed to be a cough syrup, but there's so much alcohol in it. And I just was thinking about that, and you know, because I was like, maybe I'll have a shot before I get up here on stage. I didn't. And thinking about that Lucille Ball, and that's something that just is kind of universal. And so there can be local humor in books, things that are specific, like to a time or some kind of event. And then there are these things that are more universal or have a broader range. I think a lot of physical comedy. I've been watching some Charlie Chaplin lately, and so I think it's fascinating how some works reverberate. I'll say one other thing quickly. A couple years ago, I decided to emojify this Bosch painting, which is a kind of whimsical, funny painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights. It's from 500 years ago. And people wear it on their shoes, you know, and it's still a very, very popular painting. And so I emojified the entire painting. What that means is I digitally repainted it all with emoji. And it was so fun when someone told me, you debauched a Bosch, you know.
And Bosch is actually a great example.
That's a Bosch joke, right?
That's a Bosch joke. You debauched a Bosch, the king of debauchery.
This question about why things don't stay funny actually makes me think the opposite. Like, shouldn't we have humor archaeologists who can go back and find things that weren't funny at their time, but now because we're looser or freer, because we have different morals, that now they could be funny now? We need to make that a job.
I think the word computer is very fuzzy in this context, because if I think of machine learning, we can just feed an algorithm with lots of information about what makes something funny, and you'll totally be able to tell a joke just drawing on information that has been fed.
And how do we all agree that this is a funny joke? Because obviously, culturally, the translation changes things. So in which language would that joke be funny?
But, Carla, weren't you telling us about these two AIs talking to each other, and then they all...
Yeah, and so these two AIs, and then they develop their own language and their own humor, and so that could be something that's possible. And you know, the whole idea of perverse instantiations, where you tell a computer, you program it to make you laugh, and it freezes your facial muscles, so you're always smiling. That's kind of scary. But there is a lot of work actually being done on computational humor. The first festival was in 1995. I have a name here if anybody is interested. Vinith Misra is doing quite a bit of work on this, and I have a couple of jokes. So Siri, I stayed up all night trying to figure out where the sun went, and then it dawned on me. You know, right now they're not telling stories though, and I think that's what distinguishes. And in terms of it being translatable, humans can draw from these experiences that they've lived, and at this point I don't think machines are living. And so their humor, generally they're puns or something more simplistic.
It sounds that it'll probably be really funny to the computers then. They'll just keep telling each other jokes. It'll be completely out of the question.
That was your point.
So they're bonding, basically.
They'll have personal experience.
That'll be a great time. We won't get any emails anymore because our computers will be cracking each other up.
I know.
And we can finally do some shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of, if anybody remembers that movie, Her, that's kind of, you know, at the end, they all just kind of fly off together and, you know, leave humans up to their own devices.
But I do think computers are funny now. I mean, Siri is funny. It can tell you jokes, and it works the way most of us work. Most of us don't write jokes. We repeat jokes that we hear. And so Siri has this huge catalog. The idea of a computer writing a joke, I buy it. I think it'll happen. For a long time, I used to read all the old Turing tests because I thought they were interesting. And the thing that would always trip up computers in the Turing test until one won it was puns. They couldn't deal with language the way our brains can.
Which actually, this leads to that question, why is it that lawyers always take out humor from legal contracts and terms? When I think of a lot of humor, it's based on wordplay and innuendo and ambiguity. And of course, you can't have that in a contract, because that defeats the purpose. That would be my answer.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that in relationship to this panel, this notion of technology. So much technology is meant to be efficient or have a function, or is made by corporations which have goals that they're not interested in making things dangerous or wild or just seeing if something's funny and finding out, that sort of testing that you do in theater or comedians. And I think lawyers, the same thing. Their job is not to like, let's see if this works. It's like, let's make sure this works no matter what happens.
Yeah, and as artists, I mean, I think Yuli and I both, we're not working as much in theater, even though we perform our works. You publicly, I perform through avatars. But, you know, it is about kind of not taking ourselves too seriously. It's not being overly earnest, but that kind of comes with the territory of what we're doing, you know? And there's a whole history in theater and in the arts.
And I've had contracts which are actually quite funny to me.
Yeah, I know, I have to.
So there's a lot of room in that question to expand.
I've just had contracts that I just could not even parse, you know, the language.
So can I learn to be funnier?
Absolutely. I think like anything, it's a skill, it's a talent. You practice it, you should hang around. I mean, yeah, I think there are plenty of books and recipes for how to be funny. And if you practice over and over again, I think your tolerance for failure is probably our biggest impediment to anything we want to learn.
Why did the chicken walk across the road? Because it was a hard drive. If I can be on a stage and tell jokes like that, definitely you can get funnier. And I'm trying to get funnier too.
Or maybe surround yourself with people who really like your humor and your sense of humor, so you're
trying
not the only one laughing. So humor breaks and fixes things at the same time. Ha-ha. Ha-ha.
That's a beautiful aphorism of it.
Thinking.
Yeah. Any other questions? We didn't really get a chance. Yeah. Can you do?
So I had an idea. There's a really funny stand-up comedian called Fluffy, and he does these really funny impersonations of different characters of, you know, say like a woman or, you know, a gay guy or something, and it's really funny and it's really realistic. I was wondering if Ganis, if your technology can actually switch on a switch, you know, immediately to that character, because that would be really cool. It would really take it up a notch in terms of comedy if you could have that character switch like right away to a polar bear, or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
in
no,
AR.
that kind of elasticity, because
Right.
I've been wanting to take Lucille Trackball into VR. I want to do a VR comedy hour or something like that. And, you know, you have so much more kind of latitude and agency in those spaces. And so why would comedy in VR, or even the AR that Lucille is doing right now, why would Lucille just perform on a stage and not have you know, turn into other things like a Second Life avatar or start to fly or, you know, those kind of things. I mean, a couple years ago, I staged a race against my Second Life avatar, Jezebel Langley, because I'd run the New York Marathon and I got really, really jealous of her because I felt proud of myself, but then I realized that she can teleport and she could run like 6 marathons and not get tired. And so she ran down a highway in Second Life and I ran one in real life, but she is me. And so, you know, it's also kind of exploring my own identity, but boundlessly in a way. And I think that's a really great idea. It's something I've been thinking about. So anyone who wants to collaborate with me and help me realize that.
That sounds like a humor about identity.
Yeah. But that's that idea, that identity, but that it's fungible in these digital spaces. Yeah.
So do you find that you're gravitate towards any one culture's unique sense of humor? Yes.
German.
We
Well,
were trying to find German.
Yes, but only because the only person who consistently makes me laugh is my dad. That's basically why, and I can't tell you why I laugh about. It's not his jokes. It's just the things that he says and the things that he does and how it is juxtaposed with my idea of who he is and how he grew up. So it comes out of the juxtaposition of who I think he is and what he does as himself.
It reminds me a little bit, in a completely different way, about I had an uncle who would always tell jokes during dinner, and people would just crawl under the table. They were just that not funny or just completely inappropriate.
But
Yeah.
other than that, I would say British. I find British humor really funny. I like innuendo and all that stuff.
Yeah, I find Russian jokes sometimes funny. Sometimes, you know, with Russian humor, it gets really dark really quickly. So maybe only Russians really do appreciate it. But some jokes, they're really great, especially the first and the second grade jokes. Some of them, you know, they're about Stalin and things like that. They may be not funny at times.
Yeah.
But funny and humor are not the same, right?
Is it or is it not?
I don't think so. I mean, we laugh about things that aren't funny. We laugh about things because it's a release of anxiety, tension. It might not even be a joke,
Yeah.
right? So I think we have to differentiate between.
Like Andy Kaufman,
Yeah.
sometimes it's, you know, not a joke, it's just this kind of performance and being able to inhabit this persona or character so kind of compellingly.
Yeah, he has a creation of tension, and then we have a release, but sometimes without actual humor being present.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think we're out of time. So thank you so much for coming here, and so exciting to be talking to you. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.